somewhere in the last 24 hours, your brain made a mistake. Not a dramatic one, not the kind you'd notice, just a quiet, invisible error in the way it processed something. A conversation, a decision, a memory, a feeling about someone, something small, something ordinary, something that felt completely and convincingly like clear thinking. And here's what's worth sitting with tonight. That mistake wasn't random. It followed a pattern. The same pattern it follows in every human brain, on every continent, in every culture and language and century of recorded history. A pattern so consistent, so reliable, so deeply woven into the way human minds work that scientists have given each variation its own name. And the list of names now stretches to nearly 200 entries. Tonight, we're going to spend some time with a handful of them. The ones that show up most often in the places that matter most. In relationships, in how we see ourselves, in the quiet stories we tell about why things happened the way they did. This isn't a lecture. There's nothing to memorize, nothing to apply. Just some gentle light moving slowly across the machinery of a mind that has been running quietly in the background your whole life. Get comfortable. From the moment of waking, before the first conscious decision of the day, before the first words spoken or thought deliberately formed, the brain is already sorting, already deciding which information is worth attending to and which can be safely ignored, already filtering the enormous flood of incoming data down to something manageable. And the criterion it uses for that filtering isn't neutrality. It isn't some impartial system searching for truth. The criterion, most of the time, is familiarity. The brain attends most readily to the things that already fit what it believes and lets the rest slide past without much comment. Psychologists call this confirmation bias, and it is, by almost any measure, the most thoroughly documented cognitive pattern in the entire history of the field. But the name doesn't quite capture what it actually feels like from the inside. From the inside, it doesn't feel like bias at all. It feels like clarity, like simply seeing things as they are. In 1960, a British psychologist named Peter Wasson ran an experiment that has become one of the most famous in cognitive science. He showed participants 3 numbers, 2, 4, 6. He told them these numbers followed a rule, and their job was to figure out the rule by generating their own sequences. He would tell them whether each one followed it or not. Most people formed a hypothesis almost immediately. The rule is probably even numbers increasing by 2, they thought. And then they did something very telling. They tested sequences like 4, 6, 8, like 10, 12, 14, like 20, 22, 24. Wasson confirmed each one, and so they announced their answer with confidence. They were wrong. The actual rule was simply this: any three numbers in ascending order. That's all. 1, 2, 3 would have worked. 5, 50, 500 would have worked. 3, 7, 412 would have worked perfectly well. But almost no one tested a sequence that would have challenged their hypothesis. Almost no one tried something like 1, 2, 3, which would have been confirmed and would have immediately revealed that the rule was far simpler than they thought. They generated confirming examples over and over until certainty arrived. And certainty arrived long before accuracy did. These were intelligent people, engaged people, people genuinely trying to get it right. They simply had a theory, and the theory felt right. And so they kept looking for reasons it was right, rather than reasons it might not be. This is what confirmation bias actually looks like in practice. Not dramatic, not obvious, just a quiet, persistent preference for evidence that already fits. It operates at every level of cognition. In what the eye notices, attention naturally gravitates toward things that fit existing beliefs and away from things that challenge them. In how ambiguous information gets interpreted, the same data point can look like evidence for a position or against it, depending on what was already believed before the data arrived. In what gets remembered, confirming evidence surfaces more readily, in more detail, than disconfirming evidence does. And it operates in the social environment too. Most people, given the choice, surround themselves with people who share their views. They consume media that reflects their existing beliefs. The information that reaches them tends to be information that agrees with them, because they have, without quite noticing it, arranged their world that way. None of this feels like bias. It feels like discernment, like good judgment, like surrounding yourself with quality. There's a particularly intimate version of this that lives inside relationships. When an opinion of someone has formed, positive or negative, confirmation bias quietly shapes almost every subsequent interaction with them. The person who is late once, when they are already distrusted, confirms the belief. The same person, on the same day, under the same circumstances, is given the benefit of the doubt if they are already trusted. The belief determines what the evidence means, and so the belief becomes very difficult to change, even when evidence accumulates that should change it. The philosopher Karl Popper spent much of his career arguing that this tendency, this natural human preference for confirmation, is the single greatest obstacle to genuine understanding. He said that the mark of a truly scientific way of thinking isn't the search for confirming evidence. It's the deliberate search for disconfirming evidence, the attempt to find the example that would break the theory. Most minds, most of the time, do the opposite. They find the examples that hold the theory together. They arrange the evidence into a shape that was already expected. And this runs deepest in the most personal domain of all. The story a person carries about what kind of person they are. The mind that believes it tries hard and is often underappreciated will surface dozens of examples of exactly that. Moments of effort that went unnoticed, gestures of generosity that weren't returned in kind. The moments that don't fit, the times appreciation was offered and not quite registered. The times effort was genuinely less. Those get softer treatment. They get explained, contextualized, set to one side. The mind that carries a quieter, more painful belief that it doesn't quite deserve good things, that something about it is fundamentally lacking, will find evidence for that too, with remarkable efficiency. It will catalog the disappointments and soften the gifts. It will make the pattern feel inevitable, feel like simply seeing clearly, when it is, in fact, the output of a filter set long ago that has been running ever since. The belief shapes the search. The search confirms the belief, and the whole thing turns, slowly, invisibly, like a wheel that only ever rolls in one direction. There is no switch that disables this, but there is something that changes its grip, slightly and over time, and it is simply this: knowing it's happening. Holding the certainties a little more loosely, making just a little more room between what is believed and what is true. Here is a question that seems simple, but isn't. Which kills more people every year in the United States? Tornadoes or asthma? Most people say tornadoes. Tornadoes feel dangerous. They're sudden, dramatic, visible in ways that lodge in memory. They appear in the news with footage and names and human stories attached. They have the particular quality of vividness that makes a thing feel like exactly the kind of thing that kills people. Asthma kills roughly 20 times more Americans per year than tornadoes do. But asthma doesn't have footage. Asthma doesn't arrive with a before and after, and a satellite image and a name. It recedes into the statistical background of ordinary life, where it is real and serious and chronic and quiet, and where it leaves almost no trace in the memory of anyone who hasn't been affected by it personally. The gap between how dangerous tornadoes feel and how dangerous they actually are, and the gap between how dangerous asthma feels and how dangerous it actually is the availability heuristic at work. The availability heuristic is the tendency to judge the likelihood or frequency of something based on how easily examples come to mind. If an example arrives quickly, vividly, with emotional detail attached, the thing it represents feels common. It feels like the kind of thing that happens often. If examples are slow, effortful, emotionally flat, the thing feels rare, regardless of what the numbers actually say. This is a reasonable system in many circumstances. Things that happen often do generally produce more available memories than things that happen rarely. But the system breaks down in a specific and predictable way. It breaks down whenever the memorability of something is influenced by factors other than frequency. And in a world of news cycles and social media and content designed specifically to be emotionally arresting and difficult to forget, memorability and frequency have almost completely decoupled. A plane crash is extraordinarily memorable. Horror at scale, international coverage, names and faces and survivors. It becomes a vivid, emotionally charged memory that stays available for a very long time in very many people who experienced it only through a screen. A car accident on a Tuesday afternoon doesn't make the news. It is real and tragic for everyone involved, but it doesn't have the qualities that create lasting, retrievable memories in the broader population. It dissolves into the statistical background. And yet, the risk of dying in a car journey of equivalent distance to a flight is many times higher than the risk of dying in the air. The fear and the actual danger point in completely opposite directions, because the fear isn't responding to the statistics. The fear is responding to what memory can find quickly, what arrives with force and detail, what has the quality of vivid emotional truth. This extends into the quiet corners of how a person experiences their own life. The sense of how likely something is to go wrong in a new situation, a new relationship, a difficult conversation, isn't based on careful calculation. It's based on what examples arise. And the examples that arise most easily are the ones with the most emotional weight. The failures, the embarrassments, the times things went wrong in ways that still carry some residue of feeling. Those memories are more available than the neutral ones, the ordinary ones, the times things were simply fine. This is part of why many people carry a sense that bad things happen to them more than to others, not necessarily because that's accurate, but because the painful memories have a quality of vividness that comfortable ones rarely achieve. Pain stands out. Ordinary ease fades into the background and leaves almost no trace. The psychologist Daniel Kahneman described this in terms of two selves that don't always agree. The experiencing self, who a person actually is, moment to moment, moving through the hours of a day, and the remembering self, who that person becomes in retrospect when constructing a story about what a period of time has been like. A year might have contained many ordinary, comfortable days, a reasonable amount of ease, a few genuine pleasures, challenges that were met and moved through. But if that year also contained one or two moments of real distress, the remembering self may code the whole year as hard. Because the difficult moments were vivid, because they're available, because the mind, when it reaches back, finds them first. And so the story a person tells about their own life, about how hard things tend to be, how often things go wrong, what the world is like, and how it tends to treat them, is drawn with those biases built in. More weight on the dramatic, more weight on the painful, more weight on the rare but memorable than on the common but unremarkable. isn't inventing anything. It's working honestly with what it has. It just happens that what it has, the collection of memories and associations and emotionally weighted experiences that constitute a personal history, is not a neutral sample. It is a sample skewed toward what was vivid, toward what stuck. In 1999, a psychologist named David Dunning and his graduate student Dunning-Kruger published a paper with a title that has a certain dry humor to it. They called it Unskilled and Unaware of It. What they found was this: when people perform poorly at something, they tend not to know they've performed poorly. Not because they're being dishonest or defensive or willfully blind, but because the skills required to do something well are often the same skills required to recognize that you're doing it badly. And when those skills are absent, the self-assessment suffers along with the performance. The experiments were elegantly simple. Participants took tests on logical reasoning, grammar, and the detection of what makes something funny. Then they estimated how they'd done relative to other people. The participants who had scored in the bottom quarter overestimated their performance dramatically. They believed they were above average, not slightly above average, substantially above average, in the top half by their own reckoning. The participants who had scored in the top quarter did something almost opposite. They slightly underestimated how well they'd done and tended to assume other people had performed similarly. The people who were actually most capable were also the most aware of their own limitations, because awareness of limitation is part of what competence produces. Dunning and Kruger argued that this wasn't arrogance. It was metacognitive blindness, the inability to accurately assess performance in a domain where that very ability is underdeveloped. Because accurate self-assessment requires the competence it's trying to evaluate. The finding has been simplified over the years into something it isn't quite: a tool for dismissing people who seem overconfident, which is ironic given what the research actually says. The research isn't about other people. It's about every person who has ever been new to something, or who has spent their life developing deep skill in some areas while remaining a beginner in others, which is everyone. There is a particular quality to early incompetence that's worth naming. It often comes with a kind of ease, not because the beginner is foolish, but because they genuinely can't see the complexity yet. They don't know what the experienced person sees: the dozen things happening simultaneously, the exceptions and edge cases, the fragility of what looks like a simple answer. The gap between what they know and what there is to know is invisible, because the full shape of what there is to know hasn't yet come into view. And then, as competence develops, as more is learned, more practiced, more internalized, something interesting happens. The confidence often dips before it rises again, because now the complexity that was invisible is visible, vastness of what remains can be seen. The gap between where one is and where one could be feels larger than the territory already covered. Dunning himself described this as the particular burden of the intermediate stage. The beginner doesn't know enough to see the problem. The advanced practitioner has worked through it. The person in the middle, who knows enough to see the vastness, but hasn't yet developed the tools to navigate it, often feels the most lost, the most uncertain, the most aware of how much they don't know. This is one of the stranger, less discussed aspects of learning. That real knowledge can feel less certain than false knowledge. That expertise often arrives accompanied by humility rather than confidence. That the people most at ease with the limits of their understanding are often the ones whose understanding runs deepest. The person who speaks with total certainty about something complex, with no acknowledgement of nuance or counterargument, is very often still in the early stages of understanding it. The person who hedges, who qualifies, who says it's more complicated than that, is very often someone who has spent a long time in the details and has learned firsthand how complicated the details actually are. And there's a quieter dimension to this finding, one that has nothing to do with performance or expertise. The feeling of not knowing what one is doing, the feeling of being in over one's head, of not being sure, of sensing that there is more to understand than can currently be understood, is not a sign of failure. It is, often, a sign that real learning is underway, that the edges of competence are being pressed against, that the gap has become visible, which means the person can now work with it. The gap is uncomfortable. It doesn't feel like progress, but the gap is frequently where growth is occurring quietly beneath the discomfort. In the 1970s, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky ran an experiment with a spinning wheel. The wheel was rigged. It could only land on 10 or 65. Participants spun it, watched where it landed, and were then asked, what percentage of countries in the United Nations are located in Africa? The wheel had nothing to do with the question. The number it landed on was arbitrary. The participants knew it was arbitrary. They had watched it spin at random. The people who had seen the wheel land on 10 gave answers averaging around 25%. The people who had seen the wheel land on 65 gave answers averaging around 45%. 20 percentage points, pulled in the direction of a number that was, by every measure, irrelevant. This is anchoring, and it is one of the most robust, most replicated phenomena in behavioral economics. The tendency for the first number encountered to exert a gravitational pull on every number that follows. The mind adjusts away from the anchor, but almost never adjusts far enough. The starting point shapes the destination, even when the starting point was generated at random. anchor is the first number in the room. And whatever that number is, reasonable or absurd, relevant or entirely unrelated, it bends the estimates that come after it. The price tag mentioned first in a negotiation. The salary figure a company puts on the table before a word has been said. The estimate a contractor gives at the beginning of a conversation. The number in the subject line of a fundraising email. These first numbers are not neutral. They are the invisible thumb on the scale of everything that follows. And anchoring goes further than explicit numbers. It reaches into how people are perceived and how relationships form. The first impression of a person acts as an anchor for everything learned about them afterward. If someone is encountered first as warm and open, subsequent ambiguous behavior gets interpreted charitably. If the first impression was guarded or cold, the same behavior reads differently. The anchor arrived first, and everything since has been measured against it, adjusted from it, but rarely completely liberated from it. There's a related finding called the primacy effect. When people read a list of adjectives describing a person, the adjectives at the beginning shape the interpretation of the ones at the end, far more than the reverse. The first frame is the dominant frame. The first description is the one everything else gets attached to. This is why first impressions carry so much weight, not because human beings are shallow, but because the mind uses the first information it receives as a reference point for all the information that follows. And moving away from a reference point requires a kind of sustained effort that arriving at one does not. There are people in most lives whose first impression set an anchor that has never been fully left behind. A version of them arrived first, caught at a particular moment, in a particular circumstance, on a particular day, and that version became the reference point. Everything since has been measured against it. Progress has been made, adjustment has occurred, but the anchor exerts its quiet gravity still. And there are anchors set much earlier than any adult relationship. Anchors set in childhood, when the world was making its first impressions, and they were going in deep. The things said early about what kind of person someone was, the labels that arrived before the person was old enough to evaluate them, the assessments from parents, from teachers, from siblings, about what was possible and what wasn't, about where the strengths lay and where the limits were. Those landed as anchors too. Powerful ones set early in the most formative circumstances. The adjustment from those anchors has been ongoing across years and decades. But anchors have long reach, and the adjustment, even when it has been real and substantial, may not have carried as far as it could. Two things happen in the course of a day. Someone offers a sincere, specific compliment, something they've genuinely noticed, something that took attention and care to see. And then, later, someone makes an offhand critical remark. Nothing devastating, just a small, slightly sharp thing that wasn't quite kind. By evening, it's the criticism that has stayed, not the compliment. Not because the person is fragile or ungrateful or bad at receiving good things, but because the human brain was shaped over millions of years of evolution to pay more attention to threats than to gifts, to hold onto negative information more tightly than positive information, to devote more processing to potential dangers than to potential pleasures. This is called the negativity bias, and it is one of the most fundamental features of human cognition. The psychologist Roy Baumeister spent much of his career studying this pattern and summarized the finding in the title of a paper that has become something of a touchstone in the field. Bad is stronger than good. The evidence behind that simple statement is wide and deep. Negative events have more impact on well-being than positive events of equivalent intensity. Losing $100 feels worse than finding $100 feels good, even though the objective change to the situation is identical. A single unkind comment can linger in memory far longer than a comparable kindness. In close relationships, research suggests it takes roughly 5 positive interactions to counteract the emotional weight of one negative one. The asymmetry is built into the structure of the brain itself. There are neural circuits specifically devoted to detecting and responding to threat. Circuits that are faster, more automatic, and more persistent than the circuits involved in processing reward. The amygdala, the brain's alarm system, responds to potential negative outcomes more quickly and more powerfully than to positive ones. Evolution was much more interested in protecting its creatures from danger than in helping them enjoy comfort. The ancestor who overreacted to a potential threat was inconvenienced. The ancestor who underreacted was dead. Over time, the brains that survived were the ones that erred toward caution, toward threat sensitivity, toward giving bad news more weight than good. But the world being navigated tonight is not a savanna. The brain that evolved to scan for predators is now scanning a quiet bedroom. And when it finds nothing immediate to be concerned about, it turns inward, to the social landscape, to tomorrow, to the things that were left unresolved. This is part of why the mind, in the quiet hours before sleep, runs toward the problems, toward the things unsaid, the things that went wrong, the things that might go wrong. Not because something is broken, but because the brain in its idle mode defaults to vigilance, to checking the perimeter. And in the absence of a physical perimeter to check, it checks the interior. The negativity bias shapes the internal voice too, the running commentary most people carry about themselves. That voice tends to dwell on mistakes with more detail, more specificity, more repetition than it brings to successes. Failures get analyzed. Achievements get acknowledged briefly. And then the mind moves on to what needs fixing next. This isn't a character flaw. It's the negativity bias operating in the domain of self-perception. The same asymmetry that makes bad news stickier than good news makes perceived shortcomings stickier than perceived strengths. The self is subject to the same filtering system as everything else. There's something almost tender in this when it's seen clearly. The self-criticism that persists isn't evidence of accurate self-knowledge. It's evidence of a brain doing what brains do, weighting negative information more heavily than positive information as a basic operating principle. The failures rehearsed in the quiet hours are not the objective truth of a person. They are the output of a system that is, by design, more interested in what went wrong than what went right. Knowing this doesn't silence the critical voice, but it changes what it means. The voice isn't reporting facts. It's running old software that served a purpose once in different circumstances, and that hasn't yet been updated for a world where the greatest threats are rarely physical, and where the unkind remark from this afternoon is not actually a signal that survival is at risk. The bad sticks. That's just what it does. It doesn't mean the bad is all there is. Someone cuts through traffic, close, and without warning, without knowing anything about them, without knowing where they're going, what kind of day they've had, what they're carrying. An instant impression forms. Aggressive, inconsiderate, that kind of driver, which probably means that kind of person. This is how the mind works when it explains other people's behavior. It reaches for the person, for character, for stable internal traits that explain what was just observed. But when it's the other direction, when it's this car that pulls into traffic unexpectedly because something else was on the mind, or the distance was misjudged, or there was somewhere important to be, the explanation is different. It reaches for the circumstances, for what was happening, for the unusual nature of this particular moment. This asymmetry, explaining other people's behavior through who they are, and explaining one's own behavior through what was happening, is one of the most thoroughly documented patterns in social psychology. It's called the fundamental attribution error. The psychologist Lee Ross gave it that name in 1977, building on work that had been building in the field for a decade before that. The core finding is this: when people observe others doing things, they tend to attribute the behavior to stable internal characteristics: personality, character, intention. When explaining their own behavior, they give much more weight to situational factors. The circumstances, the pressures, the constraints. In one classic demonstration, researchers showed participants a video of someone delivering a speech on a controversial topic. Half were told the speaker had chosen their position freely. The other half were told the speaker had been assigned a position by researchers and was arguing for it regardless of their own beliefs. Both groups then rated how much the speaker actually believed what they were saying. Both groups rated the speaker as sincerely holding those beliefs. Even the participants who had been explicitly told the person was assigned a position, that they were essentially performing a role they hadn't chosen, still rated them as genuinely committed to the view. The behavior was so vivid, so present, that it overwhelmed the situational explanation, even when the situation had been spelled out directly. This is the fundamental attribution error at its clearest. The behavior in front of us feels more real, more causally powerful, more revealing of essential character than any contextual explanation offered for it. And in everyday life, without researchers helpfully explaining the situational constraints, the error runs deeper. The coworker who seems cold in meetings, the neighbor who doesn't return waves, the person at a gathering who stands at the edge of things and doesn't quite join in. The natural tendency, everyone's natural tendency, is to explain those behaviors in terms of character. Cold, unfriendly, distant. The kind of person who is like that. But what's being observed is behavior in a moment. Behavior shaped by circumstances that aren't visible. The coworker who seems cold might be in the middle of something genuinely difficult, or might be someone for whom professional settings have historically felt unsafe in ways that produce guardedness rather than warmth. The neighbor might be navigating something that makes small social gestures feel impossible right now. The person at the edge of the gathering might be experiencing social anxiety so acute that what looks like indifference from the outside feels, from the inside, like enormous effort just to be present. The situation is invisible. The behavior is visible. And so the behavior becomes the person in a way that forecloses a great deal of complexity. This error runs through close relationships too, in a particular pattern worth naming. In moments of ease, when things are going well and there is goodwill to spare, people tend to give context to the people they love. They know the history, the pressures, the texture of what someone is carrying. They extend the compassion that comes from understanding. They see behavior as something that happened, shaped by circumstances. But in moments of strain, when tired, when hurt, when the relationship has been under pressure, the attribution can flip. The behavior stops being something that occurred in circumstances and starts being something that reveals essential character. They're always like this. This is who they are. They're the kind of person who does this. The same behavior. Two entirely different explanations, and which explanation is operating can determine whether a relationship moves toward repair or away from it. The fundamental attribution error narrows the world. It sorts people into fixed characters: the inconsiderate driver, the cold colleague, the difficult family member, and then confirms those characterizations with every subsequent interaction. A little more situational thinking opens things slightly, not into naivety, not into excusing what genuinely needs addressing, but into the acknowledgement that people are complicated, that behavior is complicated, and that what gets seen of other people is almost always behavior in context. And the context is almost never fully known. There is a film playing. 40 minutes in, it's clearly not what was hoped for. It isn't landing, but the ticket has been bought. The evening has been arranged around it. And so the watching continues. Another hour and a half of mild dissatisfaction. Not because anything about the next 90 minutes looks better, but because the first 40 minutes have already been spent, and it feels wrong to let them go to waste. This is a small example of something that operates at much larger scales. A career that doesn't feel meaningful, continued not because the next 10 years look better than 10 years in a different direction, but because the last 10 years are already spent and leaving feels like declaring them wasted. A relationship that hasn't been working for a long time, continued not because the trajectory looks better, but because so much has been built and invested, and given that walking away feels like an act of destruction rather than self-preservation. These are all expressions of the same thing. Economists call it the sunk cost fallacy. A sunk cost is any investment, money, time, effort, emotional energy, that has already been made and cannot be recovered. It is gone regardless of what happens next. The only relevant question, in purely rational terms, is what each available path forward looks like from here. And yet humans are remarkably, consistently, powerfully influenced by those irretrievable past investments when making decisions about the future. The direction of choice bends toward what has already been put in, even when that investment has no bearing on where the available paths actually lead. In classical economics, sunk costs are supposed to be irrelevant to decision-making. The future is what matters, the future costs and benefits of each available option. What happened before is context, not data. But human beings are not classical economists. Human beings have memories and identities, and a deep need for past investments to have meant something. And that need, entirely understandable, entirely human, leads toward decisions based on what has already happened rather than what is most likely to happen next. The psychologists Richard Thaler and Daniel Kahneman documented this pattern across dozens of domains. Business, where companies continue investing in failing projects because of the money already spent. Relationships, careers, places people live, beliefs people hold. Wherever there has been significant investment, there is gravity pulling toward continuation. Even when continuation is the wrong choice by any forward-looking measure. Part of what drives this is loss aversion. Abandoning a sunk cost feels like a loss. It feels like declaring that the years, the effort, the money, the the emotional investment were wasted. And the mind will do a great deal of work to avoid that feeling, including continuing to invest in something that is no longer serving the person doing the investing. There is a particular cruelty in this. The more that has been invested, the harder it becomes to leave. The longer someone has been in something that isn't working, the more they have to lose by the act of leaving. And so, the more strongly the fallacy grips. The trap tightens with time. And underneath, this is something worth sitting with quietly, without any urgency attached to it. There is a difference between honoring what has been given to something and being bound by it, between acknowledging the weight of the past and letting that weight determine every path forward. The past is fixed. It was real, it mattered, it was lived, but it is already spent. It cannot be the primary data point for what comes next. The only question that actually matters about any path forward is where the path goes from here. These ideas have been moving through the room for a while now. The mind that filters what it pays attention to, the memory that makes the dramatic feel common and the ordinary feel invisible, the confidence that sometimes arrives before the competence does, and the uncertainty that follows real learning like a shadow. The first number that quietly shapes all the numbers that come after it. The bad that sticks more readily than the good by design. The person we turn other people into based on what we can see rather than what we can know. The past that reaches forward and bends the present toward itself. None of these are failures. None of them are signs of something broken or wrong. They are the shape of a human mind, doing what human minds do, working quickly, working economically, working with the tools it has, built for a world that has changed faster than evolution can track, and running its old patterns in a new landscape. And there is something almost peaceful about that when it can be held plainly. Not peaceful in the sense of resolved, but peaceful in the sense of honest. This is what it is to have a brain, to think in shortcuts, to weight the memorable over the merely frequent, to protect the story of who you are against the friction of evidence that doesn't quite fit. Nobody is the exception to these patterns. The researchers who study cognitive bias are subject to cognitive bias. The therapists who help others see their patterns more clearly are subject to the same patterns. The philosophers who wrote about the examined life had almost certainly a great deal that was unexamined. This isn't a reason for despair. It's a reason for something quieter, for a kind of ongoing, low-level curiosity about the mind's operations. Not scrutiny, not vigilance, just a small, open awareness that what feels certain is sometimes constructed, that what feels like clear perception is sometimes selection, that the explanations that arrive most readily are often the ones that were already expected. The brain is not the enemy. It's just the instrument. And every instrument has its particular characteristics, its tendencies, its ways of shaping the signal it's trying to carry. The ideas can rest now. They've done enough for one night. So can you. Sleep well